Exes of Reddit who were labeled as crazy. What is your side of the story? My ex refused to talk to me or even try to reconcile. He wouldn't speak to me, answer my calls, see me. Nothing. I was furious, especially because he never gave me a good reason for the breakup. He was staying with his sister and her husband at the time, but they weren't home. It was just him. I pounded on the door and texted him saying I wanted my things back. Soon after, I got a text from his sister. She said she understood where I was coming from and told me to meet her at a store nearby so she could give me a key to go in and get my things. I went to meet her and waited. She never showed. About 20 minutes after she was supposed to arrive, she told me she didn't think it was a good idea anymore. That's when I realized she had just wanted to lure me away from the house so my ex could put all of my belongings out on the front porch. I was pissed. So I went back to their house, determined to make this dirtbag face me. I climbed over the fence into the backyard and started looking for a way in. Lo and behold, they had a black lab and a doggy door. I'm 5'3" and about 105 pounds, so I crawled through the dog door into the garage attached to the house. The door between the garage and the house was locked, so I started rummaging around the garage and found a key. I unlocked the door, went inside, headed upstairs, and threw my hands in the air like I was Houdini. My ex was so mad he actually started laughing. No progress was made, but at that point it was all about proving something. You cannot ignore me. We stayed broken up for about 2 weeks and then he wanted me back. And I was like, nope. Story 2. I had to out-crazy her just to get her to leave me alone. She cheated on me and refused to accept that I had broken up with her. She kept telling people we were still dating and would show up at my house. She even started appearing at social events I was at, so I finally snapped. I would start screaming at the top of my lungs and throw things at the wall just so she would back off. To her friends, I'm the angry ex-boyfriend, but honestly, it felt like the only way to get her to leave me alone. Story 3. Yeah, I was the crazy ex to the other girl he was seeing. We had been living together, talking about marriage, and when his side piece found out about me, he told her I was this unhinged ex who refused to let him go and kept stopping by. Yes, I stopped by the house where I had lived for 2 years, because I lived there. When I found out about her, I moved out that same day. While I was moving out, he got physical with me because he didn't want me to leave. So when she reached out later and told me all the wild things he had said about me, I had to laugh when she said, "I heard you bit him." Yes, I did bite him. When he, at 6'3", had me pinned down and was trying to strangle me. And I, at 5'2", did what I had to do. I'm sure he was terrified for his life. What a wacko I must be. Thanks for asking. There really are 2 sides to every story, especially when you date a sociopath. Good times. Story 4. I was the crazy ex when I was about 16. I had this odd sort of long-distance relationship with a guy who was very on and off with his feelings. On multiple occasions, he'd go from telling me he loved me and missed me terribly to an hour later saying I was too emotionally invested and needed to give him space. I thought I was in love with him, though now I know I was just lonely, and I was definitely a bit overbearing. But I was also in a constant state of hurt and confusion because, first, he changed his mind about me constantly. And second, he was always posting on Facebook about other girls, how cute someone looked that night, how much he loved someone else, and so on. At least once a week, we would have some big falling out where I'd get upset over something he said about another girl. He'd tell me I was overreacting, that he'd always been this way, that he was just being friendly, and that of course he loved me more than he loved those girls. He claimed he just couldn't make that public because his mom didn't like me, and what would happen to us if she got upset at him for liking me. I eventually found out he was also telling our mutual friends that I was crazy and overly emotional, and even making up stories about things I had supposedly said or done to get them to ostracize me. After about 8 months of this on and off situation, he ended things, and then acted completely shocked when I didn't want to talk to him every day. We had been best friends before the relationship, so he couldn't understand why I wasn't being warm and chatty anymore. After about 2 months of him constantly interrogating me about why I wasn't being more friendly, I finally told him I still had feelings for him and that it was hard watching him move on to other girls. He immediately pulled the whole, I still have feelings for you too. I just didn't think you'd forgive me and take me back. Routine. And then, of course, 3 days later, he ended things again. That was the last straw. I stopped caring entirely. 2 months later, just as he was trying to start things up again, I met someone new. My old ex tried desperately to talk me out of going out with the guy, but I blocked all of his numbers and accounts and cut every tie. Story 5. I had a crazy ex moment, but I wouldn't consider myself a chronic crazy ex. I got out of a 2.5-year relationship in January, and after about 2 weeks of sitting on the floor of my room eating melted ice cream with a ladle, I finally got tired of my own misery and started picking up the pieces of my life. Things were going well until he started approaching me as a friend, and I just could not handle it. I had told him he could call me in an emergency, if a grandparent died, if his car needed a jump, if he was sick enough to need a ride to the hospital. But otherwise, I needed a few months without contact. We had agreed on July as a tentative marker so I could get over my romantic feelings. Well, it turns out he thought he was having emergencies pretty damn often, so I ended up hearing from him about once a week for a while. Not counting the week he called me more than 25 times a day. Every day. And that's not counting the times he showed up randomly at my apartment or the pebbles, reed rocks, he threw at my window to get my attention when my phone was off, busting up the window screen in the process. A few weeks ago, I was happily doing my own thing and hadn't heard from him in a while when I ran into a friend who said he had something my ex had given him to pass along to me. I thought I had already collected all my stuff from his place, so I was confused, but I took it anyway. It was his electric back massager, covered in duct tape. I put it in my closet and didn't think much of it aside from trying to figure out the bizarre randomness of the whole thing. 2 days later, he sent me an email asking to talk. I told him I could talk that night if it was very important. We talked that night, and it was not important at all. Just stuff about feelings and our relationship. Things that could have waited or didn't need to be discussed at all. After I hung up, I felt absolutely horrible, caught in a wash of negative emotions, as I usually do after talking to him. My composure and dedication to effective interpersonal skills snapped that night. It was late, and I blamed him for making me feel so awful. I hadn't wanted or asked to talk to him, and if I hadn't, I would likely have been out with friends having a great time. I called him several times, probably around 10, in tears, asking why he contacted me that day, rambling about how mad I was, how unfair it was, that the phone was for emergencies, and he had just come out of nowhere, abused that privilege, and torn my heart open again. He told me he was with friends and couldn't really talk. Making excessive calls would have been bad enough, but I was so mad that night I threw out a lot of the things he had given me, even lighting a small fire to completely destroy some mementos. I also took that stupid back massager and smashed it into tiny pieces, leaving a shower of plastic in a place I knew he and his friends would see and recognize. I happened to have a tube of fake blood in my closet and considered spraying it all over, but thankfully I didn't. It wasn't right, and I don't want to do something like that again. To my credit, though, I went back about an hour later and cleaned everything up. Now I have his phone, email, Facebook, Google+, and OkCupid accounts blocked, and I'm much calmer. He used his childhood email address to contact me yesterday, so I think I'll block that. 1-2. Story 6. Male crazy ex here. After breaking up with my most recent crazy ex, I went through her emails and Facebook, blocked every form of contact, deleted all mutual friends on Facebook, and completely removed myself from her life. During the relationship, I was obsessively controlling, and it caused serious problems. People thought there was something seriously wrong with me, and honestly, there probably was. The reason for this is that my high school sweetheart still continues to intervene in my life, contacting whoever I am dating and telling them a whole number of things about me that are not true. We dated 3 times, each time shorter than the last, with her using me purely for physical relation the 3rd time. She cheated on me the 2nd time. She then called my military commander to tell her that I was bisexual, back when the military was not accepting of homosexuality, and proceeded to message my parents with all sorts of claims about me, including, but not limited to, saying I was a woman beater. She also spread these rumors around town. This left me paranoid, which showed heavily in my future relationships. Gladly, my current girlfriend is a very talented listener, and an even better talker. She has sat me down and talked through all of this with me before I ended up treating her the way I treated others in the past. We have been together for quite a while now, and none of the problems that came up in previous relationships are coming up with her. Story 7. I was a crazy ex. I have no idea what came over me. He was my first serious boyfriend, and being in our late teens, we sort of outgrew each other after 18 months. We split up amicably and remained close for a while, but we kept slipping back into the casual affection we had always shown each other. We'd be walking together, and suddenly realize we were holding hands. We agreed to put some distance between us to help both of us move on. That's when the crazy hit me. I don't really want to go into detail, but I did all the classic crazy ex things, texting him constantly, making dramatic threats, all of it. I fell into a deep depression and somehow blamed him for it while convincing myself we could get back together, even though the relationship had come to its natural end. It felt like a bereavement to me. I don't really remember how I came out of that mode. I guess it just wore off after a while. I'm deeply ashamed of it now, but it was more than a decade ago. Maybe I reacted that way because he was my first love, and at my age, 18 months felt like a long time to be together. I knew I was acting totally crazy and over the top, but I didn't care. I just wanted him back at any cost. It was completely out of character for me to be so wildly out of control. I'm a very introverted private person, and I rarely let anyone know how I'm feeling. But this was like some kind of emotional diarrhea. Story 8. I've done a couple of things that could make me seem crazy, but I have my reasons. Every single relationship I've had, I've been cheated on, so it really gets in your head. A relationship I was in 2 years ago was going really, really well, so I did everything I could to make it work. At the same time, I was extremely paranoid about being cheated on, and I started getting mad at him over almost everything. I literally went bat-crap crazy on him. I threw things, punched things, made nonsensical remarks, basically lost it. Well, he had to go to Connecticut for a conference. He was working on his math PhD at the time. Well, still is. And that's when I went even bat-crap crazier. I didn't hear from him the entire time. When he came back, he apologized and said he had been stupid busy while he was there. That's when I realized I had to let things go and started becoming a better person. 2 weeks later, I found out that he had been cheating on me at the conference with his wife. Edit. I should probably mention that when I threw or punched things, it was never at him. I either threw objects in anger or punched things that were not his body parts. I didn't know I could have that much crazy in me. Story 9. When you're young and in your first few relationships, you don't really know how to act. No one teaches you how to be in a relationship. It's something you learn over time. Almost every girl I know, myself included, has been the crazy ex. Like another Redditor mentioned before me, as a child, you try to bargain your way into everything, and this carries over into relationships. When someone leaves you, especially when they don't tell you why, and even when they do, it's hard to understand how someone you loved or cared for so much could suddenly stop caring for you. You spent so much time together, and now that person doesn't want to spend time with you anymore. Why would they do that? I think what helps perpetuate the crazy ex phenomenon is media. There are so many shows and movies that suggest if you just hold out, if you don't give up, if you prove your love, the other person will realize it and come back to you. These shows tell us that people are destined for one another, and that through thick and thin, love will find a way. Here's a prime example. In S in the City, the relationship between the protagonist, Carrie, and her love interest, Mr. Big, spans the entire series. She spends 6 seasons ping-ponging back and forth between Mr. Big and a variety of nameless, forgettable men, with the exception of Aiden. Mr. Big is an arrogant, self-serving prick who uses Carrie and toys with her head, never being clear about what he wants and shying away from commitment at every turn. He represents the unattainable bad boy. Aiden, the other main love interest, represents the good guy. He is perfect for Carrie in every way, truly loves her, and is honest about his feelings. But what does she do? She cheats on him with Mr. Big, convinces him to get back with her months later, accepts his proposal, and then ultimately rejects him and calls everything off. And why? Because deep down, she and Mr. Big are destined for one another. Love will find a way. At the end of the series, they end up together, and in the movie, they get married. How can TV present stuff like this and not have a few heartbroken girls doing crazy things to get back with the ones they've lost? The idea of, if only I do this, or if only he could see, paired with, I have nothing left to lose, leaves a lot of girls thinking up desperate, crazy ways to prove to the people they love that they are worth loving and being with. Of course, when people do these crazy things, everyone else sees it as exactly that, crazy, and wants to get the hell away. In my opinion, in most cases, the crazy ex is an emotionally immature person who is still learning the ways of life when it comes to relationships. There are many things people have to learn the hard way in order to truly understand them, and love and relationships are a few of those things. Hopefully, they learn from their misadventures and eventually transform into beautiful, emotionally stable butterflies who will be loved by someone. Story 10. My first love was a bag full of crazy, but in a strange way, just cruel, I suppose. She lost her virginity to me, and we were planning on getting engaged. I was 19, she was 17. But after that, she turned into a borderline S-addict. I couldn't keep up with her at all. If we had less than about 2 hours daily, she would insult my manhood and make fun of me in front of all her friends. She would cut me off and, as I found out later, sleep with lots of other people during those downtimes. She even made a sport out of sleeping with someone else and then seeing how quickly she could get me over to do it with her. I was genuinely used for physical intimacy. Odd. Doesn't feel good, despite what any neckbeards thinking a nympho type would be fun might assume. But the worst part was that once she finally broke up with me, she'd call every day or every other day to tell me who she had slept with while we were together, how, when, and even that she came over right afterward. She would only tell me one person or event at a time. For at least 2 weeks after the breakup, I'd get a call where she'd go into explicit detail about things like how she slept with Ryan under the bleachers at a soccer game, then called me to come pick her up, only to tell all her friends that she had just done it so they could watch her run up to me, give me a big kiss, and laugh. There were lots of instances like this. Once I stopped answering the phone, she'd write the stories in text messages, vivid, detailed, and cruel. I cried and threw up a lot. She was just evil, I suppose. Edit for another Evil Kim story. More about her and Ryan. I used to be an epic pushover. First of all, we were camping at a big party one night and she got wasted. She wanted to do it now. So I obliged for at least half an hour and couldn't stay hard because she was berating me the entire time. She pushed me off and said, "Wish you could do it like a real man." So I cried. And then she crawled out of the tent and crawled back in with Ryan. They started fooling around while I lay there, convinced it was my fault she was doing this. I thought this was just normal behavior for her and that I was so subpar it forced her to find someone better. They ended up doing it with me lying next to them, faced away, crying. She made sure to be extra loud and kept talking about how good it was to be banged by a real man. I'm a completely different person now, but goddamn, if I could go back in time, I'd kick myself. Little bish. This girl was bipolar, by the way. But that's all I know about her illnesses. I don't talk to her anymore. Ever. Story 11. Okay, I've been there. I was in an on-again, off-again situation in my very early 20s, which, looking back, was a very bad idea. But hey, I fell in love. During one of the on-again phases, I had a really awful feeling about the guy and this one girl. I tried my best to work past it, but it made me so upset every time I caught him lying or hiding his phone. I asked him if there was anything going on and said I would understand since we were broken up at the time. He told me there was never anything and never would be. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. For me, I couldn't set the feeling aside. I felt like I was sabotaging the relationship because she kept showing up everywhere, and I kept catching him in lies. He told me he only lied to avoid a fight since I was so paranoid about the situation. Finally, a year later, the day after we had a fight, he said he was going out for lunch with some friends. I went out with my friends and saw her waiting outside the restaurant. She looked uncomfortable. Despite the situation, we had never actually spoken to one another. I went to the bathroom, called him, and told him I knew he was going to see her, and that they should eat somewhere else, because I was with my friends. He told me I had no right to tell him what to do ever, and that I couldn't control his life. I didn't want to face that situation, so I quickly went outside and introduced myself to her. I apologized for how things had been between us, said I realized she was going to meet him, and asked if they could eat somewhere else. She just smiled uncomfortably and said that after she saw me go in, she had planned to suggest the same thing. At that point, she was kind and I felt guilty. So I apologized again for how uncomfortable things had become. She said she understood and then added, "But I hope you understand there is nothing between us anymore. Me and him are just friends now." At that point I thought, anymore? She then explained that all those times over the past year when I was slowly going insane, they had actually been together. She had thought we were broken up. He had lied and led both of us on. Of course, I explained what I had been told. She looked sorry, and I told her it was okay. Then, finally, the douche shows up across the street to come to lunch. She looks at him, raises her shoulders, and walks away. I went and lost my mind like I never had in my life before. And that was when I became the crazy ex. Edit. The crazy part was that I put up with it for over a year. I was obviously desperately unhappy the entire time. The highs were high, but the lows were very low. A lot of friends and family wanted me to end it, and I just didn't listen. Looking back, I feel like I was delusional for thinking things could ever work out, but honestly, I'm glad it happened. You learn a lot about yourself from something like that, and you carry those lessons with you. In the future, you know when it's time to just let go. Story 12. Right after college, I moved 2,000 miles to live with my fiancé. I had no job and didn't know anyone. Eventually, I got a job, but I still had no friends and was incredibly depressed. About a year later, with no warning, on the day my mom came to visit to pick out wedding dresses from another state, my fiancé took me aside, said he was leaving, told me I needed to move out in a week, and drove to his family's home about 4 hours away. No explanation. Nothing. Furious and hurt are both understatements. I ended up moving out, going to therapy twice a week, and being on antipsychotics. I had a history of anxiety attacks dating back to when I was 17 and was essayed. So he came back while I was in my new apartment and decided he wanted to rethink things. He asked if he could visit. I had already taken my Ambien and Xanax for the night, but I jumped at the chance that maybe he had changed his mind. He came over, and apparently we had did it, but because of the meds, I have absolutely no memory of it. That night ended with the shocking discovery of 2 positive home pregnancy tests. The despair that hit me was overwhelming. I felt completely crushed. I could barely get out of bed, and the only thing keeping me functional enough to work was relying more and more on my medication. So I went to the OB/GYN to get a blood test and, if needed, a referral for an abortion provider. Luckily, the test said I was not pregnant. Unluckily, I found out I had a very aggressive strain of HPV and gonorrhea. Turns out that before sleeping with me, my fiancé had gone back to his college town and slept with someone else. That was the point where depressed turned into completely falling apart. I ended up hospitalized for 2 days. So yes, I was the crazy ex, and I'm sure in his eyes, I looked unreasonable. But there are always 2 sides to every story. Story 13, I ended up becoming crazy, but not toward him. My ex-boyfriend was an abusive, manipulative a-hole who pretty much brainwashed me into believing everyone, including my family, was against our relationship. I began accusing friends and family of being jealous whenever they suggested I should leave him because he would beat me. In my messed up thought process, I convinced myself that meant he loved me more. When we finally broke up, after a huge fight where I finally defended myself and he was arrested, I was still obsessed with wanting to be with him. I kept contacting him to apologize, and he fed me lies and false promises about us getting back together. For that to happen, I would have had to not testify, but I refused to do so. That's when he made it clear we weren't getting back together. I regret not testifying, especially since the girl before me did the same thing and also never testified. At the time, I thought she was a psycho liar. But after going through the entire ordeal and receiving a message from one of his recent exes about his behavior, I realized he was the crazy one all along. Story 14. I'm crazy, but I'm not quite an ex yet. I'm very lucky to have a partner who somehow manages to cope with my crazy and understands that sometimes I just need time to spin out before I can calm down again. That being said, there are moments in our relationship when I completely lose control of my sanity. I've had episodes where I've cut myself, taken too many sleeping pills, walked 14 miles, and even jumped out of a second-story window. In those moments, I knew I was acting irrational, but I didn't care about myself or any future consequences. All that mattered was making it painfully clear that I was upset, and that if I didn't get what I wanted, my partner would be left feeling the guilt. I did have legitimate reasons to be upset about the issues we were dealing with, but my reactions were nowhere near appropriate. And honestly, some of those reactions were about things that happened in their life before I even met them, which is ridiculous when I look back at it now. Just the other day, my partner tried to leave my house after a fight we had. Within about 30 minutes, I cycled through every emotional state imaginable. First, I acted indifferent about them leaving. Then I got angry that they would walk out and told them not to ever come back. Then I went straight into heartbreak, feeling abandoned over what was honestly a small argument. When I wasn't getting anywhere trying to convince them to stay, I turned physically violent, but only toward objects, never toward them. And when that still didn't work, I fell into begging. All of this can go away right now if you don't leave. The rest of the day can be perfect, I told them. When that didn't convince them either, my final move was to lie across their windshield so they physically couldn't drive off. They finally caved, told me to get in the car, and we ended up going out to eat. On a positive note, I kept my promise and we ended up having an awesome night. I'm constantly apologizing for my behavior, and I am in therapy trying to get to a place where I don't live such a chaotic, reactive life. Fun fact, I'm male, and so is my partner. Story 15. I haven't talked to my ex much since we broke up 2 years ago, but I'm pretty sure he's a Redditor. I respect him a lot, but he's a bit of a sheep. A friend of mine, who dated him very briefly in high school and stayed relatively good friends with him, observed that he tends to adopt the personality of whoever he's closest to at the time. Pretty astute. Around the time we broke up, a lot of our confrontations were caused by his attitude, which had become increasingly misogynistic since his roommate had moved in. His roommate was also the type to always have a "my crazy ex" story, so it wouldn't surprise me if I ended up being labeled the crazy ex. He made me feel completely crazy for not just letting sexism and crudeness slide. One time, I was talking to him on the phone. He lived an hour and a half away while I was in school, and I was talking about my floor mate's obsession with Taylor Swift. Being your average girl, I said, "I don't get it. Personally, I think she's really squinty and always looks like she's trying never to move her face so she won't risk looking unsexy." And yes, as bishy as that sounds, I still think it. He could have said, "I agree with you," or "I think she's pretty," and I would have been totally fine. Unfortunately, he responded with, "Hey, I'd stick it in her." The language appalled me, and I felt so disgusted that I hung up. He made me feel terrible about it for a long time afterward, and I started to feel like I was a crazy girlfriend. Since we've broken up, I've mentioned it to a few people, including a friend who used to date him, and they've all been equally appalled. So I feel like I really wasn't crazy for that. The post-breakup period wasn't brutal, but he's been very good at calling the shots and guilting me when things don't go his way. For example, he was the one who decided we shouldn't communicate for a while after breaking up. I reluctantly agreed. He did the dumping, though I knew it was coming to an end, and I was convinced we could stay buddy-buddy right away. Then, when I started dating a new guy relatively soon afterward, I guess the timing felt like a slap in the face to him. But we're still dating 2 years later, so he really had no right to try to control what I did. Anyway, he suddenly wanted to talk again, mostly to complain about how hurt he was. On the day of Canada's awesome gold medal hockey win at the 2010 Olympics, he texted me to celebrate the win. Feeling pissed off, he didn't even like hockey. And given that this was so soon after he had said we shouldn't talk, I texted back telling him not to message me. He responded by calling me a bish and then berating me to all of his friends while someone happened to be filming it. I felt absolutely fantastic. He called the shots about when we could and couldn't speak. He was a total hard ass when he didn't want to communicate, but when I didn't, or when I moved on with my life and found a new circle of friends and he suddenly wanted to be in my life, he got to play the poor victim whom everyone felt sorry for. After about a year of us trying way too hard to be friendly with one another, again, mostly at his insistence, I cut him off entirely. This prompted a pretty upset response from him. He's since told me that it caused a huge bout of depression last year, which made me feel incredibly guilty. Basically, I learned that if I wanted to talk, I was a clingy, obsessed bish. If I didn't, I was a cold bish. As they say on Entourage, "Hey Tom, I heard you and Natalie broke up." Yeah, turns out she was crazy. Story 16. I was a crazy ex. He was the longest relationship I had until now. We met at a party, connected and flirted, but he lived in another state and was just visiting a mutual friend. The more we talked over the phone and online, the closer we became. At some point, we decided to give it a shot. After a few months of dating, things at home got really violent and he offered to pay my way to come live with him. He wanted to rescue me from my bat-crap crazy religious family. I moved in with him and his roommate. A week later, he told me that he loved both his roommate, a girl I had become friends with, and me. For the next 6 months, he ping-ponged between the two of us. She was happy with sharing. I was devastated. He made promises not to sleep with her, but he was constantly in her room while I was left in ours. I cried so much during those 6 months. I barely ate, barely slept, and lost 40 pounds. I started snooping to catch him breaking his promises, grabbing his phone and trying to hack into his computer. It finally got to the point where he ended things because I was too clingy. I loved him. He saved me, remember? I was completely isolated from anyone who could bring me to my senses. All of my close friends were hundreds of miles away. When he told me he was choosing the other girl over me, unless you've been there, you cannot understand the overwhelming self-revulsion and self-hate a person goes through. I wasn't good enough to hold on to him. I felt like I was nothing. Then something good happened. A friend paid for my way to come home for Christmas, and when I got there, I just never went back. I left everything I owned. My books, my laptop, my Xbox, everything, and stayed with a friend. 4 years later, I'm engaged to the love of my life, a wonderful man who loves me more than I could have ever hoped for. But the pain is still there, along with the anxiety that it could happen again. That bastard ruined a part of me, and it's something I can never get back. That fear will always be there, and I hate him for it. Story 17. I was a crazy ex once, just once. And honestly, I needed to reply because I was genuinely made that crazy. I'd been dating this guy all through high school. We lived in the same neighborhood, were the same age, same grade, just at different schools. A few weeks before senior prom, he started acting weird. Since he got out of school earlier than I did, I knew he'd be home. So I decided to surprise him. I put on something hot, used the key his mom had given me, and slipped in through the back door, only to walk in on the neighbor girl on the couch with him. I absolutely lost it. I grabbed her by the hair and threw her into the street, and he and I ended up in a full-on fist fight. I left completely broken, physically and mentally, and went home. I took my prom dress back, returned the tickets, and planned to spend prom night eating Ben & Jerry's and crying to sad movies instead of getting dressed up. On the actual day of prom, he showed up at my house. "I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to hurt you. I love you. Come back." And that was it. I snapped all over again. I started throwing stuff at him from the porch. A pile of tapes and CDs, VHS movies. Yeah, I'm old. Random clothes and whatever else he'd ever given me. He ran around the side of the house, and I leaned out the window hurling anything I could grab and screaming that he was a pedophile. By the end of it, the entire neighborhood knew he'd been messing around with the girl who lived across the street. I left for college early that summer, and all fall, he kept emailing and sending letters about how he and the girl, weren't together, and that it had all been a mistake. Eventually being homesick, I decided we should give it another shot. We lasted until my 21st birthday, when I caught him sleeping with a different girl. She was 16 and one of his sister's friends. That's when I went full-on crazy. I keyed his car, drunkenly pissed in the exterior heater vent, standing on the hood with my back pressed against the window so it would roll down, and smashed several empty bottles of Boone's Farm against his front door. Oh, and I also slept with his best friend. I have never since displayed such a complete lack of control. For all the heartache he caused, I had zero regrets. Funny enough, he called me a couple of years ago because he was single again and wanted to see if I wanted to hang out, saying, "You were always my one true love." I laughed, and laughed, and laughed, and laughed, and then I hung up on him. Story 18. I used to be seen as the crazy, super jealous, insecure, clingy girlfriend by friends, classmates, and everyone around me. My boyfriend at the time was constantly flirtatious with girls online. I found out when he left his MSN open and received suspicious messages like, "Hey gorgeous, get online," right in front of me. I confronted him calmly each time, and he swore it wouldn't happen again. But it did. Over and over. I was young and naive, thinking we could work it out. He was fairly obviously in love with someone else, which he confirmed after we split up. Because he broke my trust repeatedly, I became very insecure and, yes, crazy. Eventually, I broke it off and went into therapy because I was so broken after 3 years of that. Now, I'm in a very loving, trusting, and wonderful relationship. I actually get a little weary of people who call their exes crazy. I usually wonder if they treated that person fairly. I know there are definitely some genuinely crazy people out there, but there are always two sides to every story. I wish people would keep that in mind before ridiculing someone for being crazy when they only know one side of the story. Sometimes two people are simply wrong for each other, and staying in that kind of relationship can bring out the worst in one or both of them. Story 19. We were both crazy. I was extremely codependent, and she was highly narcissistic. I expected her to provide me with my self-worth, whereas she wouldn't even acknowledge me when I spoke. But I loved her because I saw so much to fix, and I was convinced I could fix it. I thought I could love her out of her alcoholism, and maybe in return, she'd see me as the best man ever. Instead, she triggered every abandonment issue I'd had as a kid, and the worst parts of me came out. I became insecure, distrustful, accusatory, and enmeshed. I didn't know how to say, "This isn't working," or assert myself enough to move on peacefully. Our relationship lasted only 2 months, but the breakup was the most emotionally confusing and devastating experience I've ever had. Still, it led me to therapy, helped me realize my whole family was codependent, taught me how to recognize and avoid narcissists, and ultimately made me feel far more prepared to love. Story 20. The relationship started out like a fairy tale. He was kind, considerate, genuinely interested in me and my interests, funny and attentive. When we got married, I joined all his activities at his urging so we could spend more time together. In the process, I lost all my own hobbies, and he dismissed my interests as stupid. Over time, he stopped listening to my input in the relationship and did whatever he wanted. The only time I got to do something I wanted was either 1, when one of his friends suggested it as a good idea after I'd already asked and he had said, "That's stupid," or 2, when I got so upset about always being treated poorly that he gave in just to quiet my crazy behavior. Every problem in our relationship was treated as my fault. Even when I calmly expressed how hurtful his words or actions were, he would twist my words and make me feel guilty for speaking up, so much so that I would end up comforting him instead. After years of this, I developed serious depression and anxiety, and he told me to just suck it up and stop being so weak. When the medication didn't help, I realized the only thing left to change in my life was him. When I asked for a divorce, I became crazy in his eyes. He has told our friends that I am insane, need to be hospitalized, am an alcoholic, addicted to corn, and a deviant who forced him to do things in the bedroom. He is literally twice my size. So yes, to him and to all my former friends who chose to believe his version of events, I am a crazy ex, guilty as charged, and I wouldn't change a thing, except that I would have left a lot sooner. Story 21. It was the first time I had ever experienced the kind of love that made me feel like I couldn't stand to be apart from someone, and we spent almost all our time together. I was going through an incredibly difficult period mentally, dealing with post-traumatic stress and an eating disorder that was consuming every part of my life. Even though I was a painfully insecure mess, she helped pull me out of the hole I dug for myself and reminded me that life was still worth pursuing. If she hadn't stepped in when she did, I might not be here today. And even though we're completely separated now, that will always mean a lot to me. I never accused her of cheating outright. I knew she wasn't. But I was in such an unstable state of mind that I couldn't imagine anyone being with me without eventually betraying me. My self-esteem was non-existent, and that spiraled into breakdowns and panic attacks that I still don't know how she managed to handle. I sometimes feel like you'd need a manual to deal with me for any length of time, because I have so many sensitivities and get overwhelmed so easily, whether it's from noise, visual overload, or small disruptions in routine. Back then, I was also completely unmotivated, but the depression was so heavy that even basic tasks felt like climbing a mountain. I threatened and attempted self-harm multiple times, and that hurt her deeply. I recognize now how wrong and harmful those threats were, but at the time, I was young, terrified of being alone and drowning in my own fear and pain. I didn't understand what I was doing, I just did what I thought I had to do to keep her from leaving. After breaking up, we were on and off a few times, but only as friends rather than lovers. That arrangement didn't work well for either of us because I couldn't contain my jealousy and paranoia. I fully admit I was wrong for making random assumptions and accusing her of things, but at the time, I just wanted reassurance that she was still thinking of me. Under different circumstances, I truly could have married her. She was one of the most wonderful people I've ever known. But I've accepted that my tendency to scrutinize her actions made it impossible to maintain any contact, so I've stopped checking in on her altogether. I sincerely hope I never have to bother her again, and that she lives a fulfilling, happy life. Story 22. I have to say, like most people, I've been on both sides, but I think I was the worst one in terms of acting a bit psycho after the breakup. I regret some of my actions, but after reflecting later while trying to redeem myself a bit, I realized that my behavior wasn't psychotic in the sense that I was trying to torment her. It was more that I was tormenting myself by not properly processing my feelings or expressing them. Things could have ended a lot worse. We broke up during what was supposed to be a break. I left the house on a Monday thinking she needed some space and that we'd get back together by Saturday night. Instead, I found out she was already involved with another guy. This was a girl who had gotten so incredibly jealous before that I couldn't even keep my phone on me when I was with her in case I got messages from my male friends, let alone female ones. It was my first girlfriend, and after a few years together, my emotions ran very deep. I didn't really talk to friends about it, and perhaps refused to accept that it was over. We kept in touch online, which only made things worse, feeding me false hopes and preventing me from moving on. When she mentioned how her life had moved forward, I would get upset. When she mentioned another guy, I would spiral into obsession. Around this time, I started drinking. One night, I accessed her email and saw a picture of her with a guy. I also discovered where he worked, something I have a certain knack for finding. Over instant messaging, I manipulated her into confirming that they were indeed seeing each other, all while pretending to be innocent. Then I started making threats, escalating worse and worse. She didn't take them seriously until I told her how I could act on them, mentioning where he worked. She probably imagined the situation as much more nefarious and dangerous than it really was. Rightfully, she called security. Thankfully, they never acted on it. Perhaps she never even rang them. I wasn't to know. That was enough to wake me up and feel real shame for my actions. What I did was far worse than anything she had done. The takeaway is that there can be wrong on both sides, but most of the emotional chaos afterward comes from not properly processing trauma. If you or someone you know is going through something similar, it's vital to talk about it or seek help. Addressing these feelings early can even save lives. Story 23. I promise I wasn't crazy. I'd been dating my now ex-boyfriend for about a year and a half. We'd already had issues with him cheating, but after a long, exhausting cycle of crying, hugging, and angry makeup banging, he swore he was done with the other girl. He deleted her number, email, Facebook, everything. I let myself believe we'd worked through it. A couple of months later in the summer, we rented a cottage for a week. He just bought a new phone that let you set a message to pop up when you turned it on. One morning while he was making breakfast, I picked it up planning to set something cute and silly for him to find later. Right then, a message from her popped up. The girl he'd cheated on me with. The girl he'd sworn he hadn't spoken to in months. My heart dropped. I opened the messages and, of course, found out they were messing around behind my back again. In this mix of panic, betrayal, shock, and pure adrenaline, I walked out the door, marched to the dock, and threw his brand new phone straight into the lake. Then I got in the car and left without a word. And that, apparently, is how I became the crazy ex. Story 24, I was considered a crazy ex, but I didn't start out that way. My ex manipulated me, and in hindsight, pretty much brainwashed me. I've been through counseling, worked through it, and I'm okay now. What I didn't realize at the time was that he was a pathological liar. He lied constantly to make himself sound more interesting, about his parents being alcoholics, about them wanting a divorce, about doing drugs and smoking. The lies never ended. He refused to be intimate with me, claiming God told him not to. But then, shockingly, he ended up doing it with a girl at summer camp who had the same name as me. He made me believe I was nothing without him and tried to isolate me from my friends. especially my best friend, who had started noticing that something about him was off. It was only after we broke up that I could see the full scope of what I had been subjected to, and why, at the time, my reactions might have seemed crazy to anyone watching. He constantly claimed he heard voices telling him to hurt me, although other times he'd admit he made them up. I wasn't allowed to wear makeup because that was what they did. I wasn't allowed to brush my teeth because to him that meant I was trying to attract other boys. I couldn't go to the dermatologist for the rashes and stress acne I developed because he said I was trying to change who I was. I wasn't allowed to hang out with people either because he insisted they were trying to take me away from him. And keep in mind, we only saw each other on weekends because we lived half an hour apart. When I finally broke up with him, I cut off contact because every conversation turned into yelling and cursing. But afterward, he went around telling everyone that I had done terrible things to him. So, in my old town, I'm known as the crazy ex, even though he still occasionally harasses me. And it's been 3 years. Story 25. Love withdrawal can make you do insane things. For me, this was some kind of weird foreshadowing. I was dating this girl who was rooming with a smoking hot lady about 10 years older than us. She wasn't trashy per se, but she also wasn't particularly picky about her lovers. No, I never slept with her. Anyway, I'm over at their place with my girlfriend, and hot lady's boyfriend is there too. He seems like a cool guy. Kinda nerdy, not much of a work ethic. He talked a lot about how he could get paid for acting like he was working, but never rude or mean and generally friendly enough. The four of us chat for a while before my girlfriend gets horny, and we bail to my place to get our fun on, and frankly, allow them to do the same. I saw him a couple more times before hot lady lost interest and moved on to the next beau. He's always been kind of a good old boy type, never once rude or mean to me. A couple of months later, my girlfriend calls me absolutely freaking out. Hot lady had broken up with her boyfriend and more or less hooked up with someone else within a couple of days. Dude is understandably upset, but he has completely lost it. He's drunk, pacing outside their house, pounding on the door, circling around to the back trying to break in, and demanding to see hot lady, who isn't even there. She's off with her new beau. Meanwhile, my girlfriend is alone in the house with this guy, completely terrified. I ended up breaking a few speeding laws to get over there, heart pounding the whole way. When I arrived, he was drunk out of his mind, and his buddy was trying to drag him back into his truck to cool off, but he wasn't having any of it. I finally managed to get him to listen. I convinced him that while hot lady's car was there, she wasn't actually home, and he needed to leave before the cops showed up. I even managed to scare him into thinking he'd committed a crime. Though, technically, other than causing a domestic disturbance, he hadn't. He reluctantly agreed to leave. I went inside, calmed my girlfriend down, and we spent the rest of the night at my place, heart still racing from the chaos. A couple months later, things between us were going downhill fast. She constantly expected me to handle things for her, fix her rented house, pay for whatever, and a million other demands. Sure, she was good in bed, relatively attractive, and smart, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was using me, thinking occasional intimacy was enough payment. One night, we had a huge fight at my place, and she stormed out. About an hour later, I suddenly remembered some work clothes of mine at her place, worth about $400, that she could ruin. I immediately drove over to retrieve them. As I pulled up, I noticed her car, and the car of a friend I had long suspected she kept around as a backup in case things between us fell apart. My mind went into overdrive, flooded with images of them together, unable to shut off. I knocked on the front door, loudly, because I knew they wouldn't hear me otherwise, and shouted, "Jill, I know you're in there. Give me my stuff." No response. I tried again, louder this time. I went around to the back door to see if I could spot anything. Her bedroom door was visible from there, and although it was closed, I could see the light on. I pounded on the back door and tried the handle. It was, of course, locked, so I went back to the front and started knocking again, all while images of them doing it on my work gear ran through my mind. Great plan, I thought. That awful woman. I was still pounding on the door when a truck pulled up and a guy yelled something like, "What the heck are you doing, a-hole?" I told him my ex was in there, probably having Eason tearing up my things, whatever else came to mind at the moment. Turns out my ex had come home in a rage, called a couple of friends, and they all went out for drinks in her friend's car. The only one home was the attractive woman, sitting in her room, terrified. The guy who came over was Hot Lady's friend. He called her, had her bring my stuff to him, and then I got the hell out. I apologized profusely to him. He was actually pretty cool about it and said that my girlfriend wasn't worth any of this. That line was almost exactly what I had said to Hot Lady's previous boyfriend some months before, and I was suddenly struck by the similarity of the situation. I drove home in a silent kind of shock and reflection. She called me a couple of days later, asking about my stuff and wanting to work things out, but I was done. I later heard she got pregnant by someone else, earned a graduate degree, and raised the child as a single mom. Moral of the story: love makes you crazy. Story 26. I got pretty creepy about a girl I dated in high school for like 10 years after we broke up. I wrote about 400 songs about her, including half a dozen concept albums and a novel too. I put one of her rings on a chain and soldered it so I couldn't take it off. I even made an ultra-detailed map of her house from memory and satellite photos. We met up a few years ago and, well, I managed to creep her out pretty thoroughly. Shockingly, not a surprise. So, even though I was never the type to wait outside her house or do anything outright disturbing, I think I still qualify for Crazy Ex status. Why? My parents were workaholics and emotionally unavailable my whole life, and I grew up in the middle of nowhere, alone most of the time until I was about 12. I don't love my parents. I have a hard time loving or feeling much at all. I think the reason I got so creepy about that girl was that I loved her, and at the time, I hadn't loved anyone since. I also dated a string of terrible people afterward. So I guess I imprinted on her because I didn't have anything else to attach to. I also broke up with her for silly high school reasons and regretted it, which probably didn't help. But hey, I'm better now. Story 27. When I was 18, my girlfriend tried to blackmail me into staying with her by threatening to cut herself, use drugs, and even kill herself when I broke up with her. I still cared about her and didn't want anything to happen, so I did the only thing I could think of. That wasn't caving to her demands or letting her harm herself. I called her dad, explained everything, and emailed him the AM logs where she said those things. I got calls, texts, and AM messages from her friends and the guys she dated for literally years afterward, accusing me of making up lies to her parents and ruining her life, promising they were going to beat me up. Her version of the story was that she dumped me, and I faked all the evidence to get revenge. For all I know, she might still be telling people about her crazy ex who made up lies to get back at her. Story 28. I went completely crazy over my first love. We broke up, got back together for a month, and then he ended it for good. I cried myself to sleep every night for 6 months. Whenever I saw him out, I would stand in front of him trying to speak, but just crying, right there in public, until he got up and walked away. I didn't care who saw. I just wanted him to know how much pain I was in, hoping he would pity me and love me again. Once he called to ask if it was okay that he went on a date with our mutual friend. I said it was fine, then called him back 5 minutes later screaming and crying. Eventually he left the country to get away from me. I think he still loved me but knew we weren't a good match because of the big age gap. I even called him before he left saying I would go with him. It was our last chance. He politely declined. In retrospect, he handled everything with remarkable patience and never treated me badly. It took me 5 years to get over him, but I learned my lesson. Story 29. I was once with someone who brought out the worst in me. It lasted for years, and I lost who I was. Now, slowly returning to my old self and looking back from a distance, I realize I acted completely out of character. My behavior was inexcusable, driven by pain, lies, and being used for years. I made someone the center of my life, and that place was never meant for her. Looking back, that moment stands out in an otherwise plain, uneventful existence. I don't mind living my life the way I do. I like working for things, taking safe steps, and giving time to what is truly worth it. I wasn't crazy. I was stupid. The idealized version of her, the one she carefully lied about, seemed worth it. Who she really is, isn't. At least not for my time. Hopefully, she will now be treated as she truly deserves. Nothing more, nothing less, good or bad. That's not my role. Time will place her where she belongs, right next to the others who once meant a lot and are now just ordinary people. I don't remember how they felt, how they smelled, or whether my heart raced at the thought of them. Acting crazy was a desperate attempt to make sense of a mountain of lies and confusion, and I will never know the truth. That chapter is over. Let life put her back in her rightful place. Everything we do always ripples. Story 30. Yeah, I'm a crazy ex. Guy, 20. Backstory. My childhood had some rough years. I never had a good relationship with my dad, and the people I could rely on were my mother, my stepdad, and a small but close family. I was an only child, and the youngest in the family. Then I started getting bullied at school, and I went from being one of the smartest in class to being seen as one of the problem kids. Around the same time, I was preparing to become a big brother. But things went wrong, and it hit my family hard. Later, my mom and stepdad divorced, and I lost him too. And the best friend I had through all of this, truly a sitcom-level best friend, moved across the country. So when all of this happened over just 1 to 2 years, and I was being bullied every day at school, I took it hard and started to hate my life. I'm generally a happy, positive guy, but during those years I was so depressed I could barely handle it. My self-image and self-esteem were crushed, and it still affects me today. So how does this make me crazy? After those difficult years, the only way I could move on and get back into the game was to shut down my emotions. I acted like I didn't care what people thought of me. I closed everything off, and even though I regained some of the friends I'd lost, I didn't truly trust anyone. I did everything I could to avoid being hurt again. It worked well enough. I became reasonably happy again. But when it came to love, nothing ever clicked. I never found someone I genuinely liked, and for years that left me feeling lonely and worried. But when I changed schools years later, I found her. She was literally my dream girl. I never had the confidence to ask her out, so we just became close friends, which was already more than I ever thought I could hope for. I never believed a girl as perfect as her could be interested in someone as flawed as me. But after 2 years, she was. Neither of us had any real experience with love or feelings, so we were both overly cautious. She was unsure and needed time alone, and she asked me to wait. I did, but while I waited, months really, I wrote to her several times just to remind her that I still cared. When she finally replied, she told me how much it meant to her. She had gone through a rough time during that period, and my messages had helped her. Sometime later, we got back together, and I could tell she truly loved me. But because of my past, I had no idea how to express my feelings directly. I was scared, even though we both knew what we felt. I don't think that was enough for her. She started to doubt me. Then she started to shut me out. And that was the end. She really changed my life for the better. And for a long time, she was my biggest source of joy and happiness. She was my dream girl. And even with her own emotional struggles, I understood her almost too well. But here I am now. I haven't heard from her in a long time, yet I still write to her sometimes, just to remind her that I care. I feel pathetic for not moving on, but I like to think that maybe my messages cheer her up, even if she never replies. I try my best, but without knowing what else to do, that's all I can offer. Even if she wants nothing to do with me, and I know that's on me. I still want her to feel appreciated. I still feel terrible for hurting her, and the guilt of disappointing her never really left. All I can hope for is that there's a tiny place for me in her heart, just enough to know that everything we had wasn't for nothing. I like to believe I'm just someone who refuses to give up on things that truly matter. But deep down, I feel like a terrible person for holding on like this. And every time I hear horror stories about crazy exes, I feel sick knowing I've become that guy. Story 31. I hate the term crazy ex because I struggle with depression and limerence, and it feels awful to be called crazy for something I can't fully control. I haven't dated in such a long time because I'm terrified of being seen as a blubbering, lifeless mess again by someone I once trusted to understand what I deal with. And even though I'm usually a confident person, it's humiliating to feel like someone is living rent-free in my head for 80% of the day. It makes me feel weak and completely shatters that confidence. I've always seen myself as a logical person, so it's frustrating and painful not to know why I feel the way I do, or why I can't seem to stop, even when my rational mind is telling me something completely different. Story 32. My ex was a sociopath with everything that comes with that. It was the worst relationship I have ever been in. This was back in 2010. It started with lies, endless lies. Then came the yelling and the constant attempts to control where I worked, when I worked, what I wore, and what he considered appropriate. He isolated me from my friends and family, and I was too embarrassed to tell anyone what was happening. I had never felt so alone. Eventually, the abuse became physical. He hit me, punched my knees, one of which will never heal properly, scratched my face, and slammed my head against the wall. He called and texted my friends, claiming I had been sleeping with them and that they now had AIDS, which was a complete lie. When I finally decided to leave, he cut himself. How do you walk away from someone who is trying to kill themselves right in front of you? I was covered in blood and had to drive him to the hospital, where he threatened me into staying silent about what had actually happened. He constantly manipulated me to stay in control, and he never felt guilty about anything he did, no matter how wrong it was. I didn't know what to do, so we stayed together for another 5 months before I finally had enough. I called the police because I wanted him out of my apartment. When he realized I was serious about leaving, he lost it. Even though his abuse had stopped being physical for a while and had shifted to verbal and emotional attacks. The moment I called the cops, his behavior went straight back to the physical violence I had dealt with months earlier. I panicked and punched him in the face. I used to box, so my jab is solid, and I ended up getting arrested for defending myself. But at least that was the moment I finally got out. I haven't seen him since, and I want to keep it that way. I had a restraining order until 2015. Today, I'm with the most amazing person I could have ever hoped for. I'm doing so much better now. And honestly, he was also just a lazy jerk who freeloaded off me. Story 33. I strongly believe a lot of crazy ex behavior comes from the dumper not being honest. We're so scared of hurting people that we hide behind "it's not you, it's me, and I'm not ready for a relationship right now," when the real reasons are things like boredom, annoying habits, attraction to someone else, mistreatment, or just not being compatible. Then, when the dumper asks, "Can we just be friends?" it's no surprise someone who truly loved them will hold on to hope. This is especially true for people who keep booty calling their exes. If you keep dangling something in front of someone, don't be surprised by the way they react. Don't abuse the power of being the dumper. Be honest. If you can't be kind and direct, at least be clear and rational about what went wrong from the start. Story 34. I'm not sure if I count. I dated a sociopath in high school, and he was a master manipulator. He scared me into staying with him and twisted my reality so much that I genuinely felt like no one, not even authority figures, could protect me. And to some extent, that was probably true. He also managed to convince everyone except my parents and my best friend that I was the heartless one, that I was unfeeling, and that I was manipulating him. I won't go into all the details of our relationship, except that I finally managed to leave when I moved away for college. Even after that, I checked in regularly with mutual friends to keep track of his mental state. He had rages where he wanted to hurt anyone he thought had wronged him, and to make sure I still had 5 states between us. If I knew he'd be driving through my state, I made sure never to be alone. I'm sure I probably came across like a stalker to the people I asked. I found out a few months into my freshman year that he had gotten a high school dropout drug user pregnant. Over the next 9 months, I reached out to our mutual friends, begging them to please keep an eye on her, check for bruises, watch for any signs of abuse. Instead, I was told I was jealous, obsessive, and needed to move on. I was terrified that screaming, crying infants would push him over the edge and that he would take it out on her. She had twins. She was in one room caring for one baby. He was in another with the other. By the time he handed the infant to the grandmother, the baby was not breathing. He did not go to prison. There was no physical proof, and no one could keep their story straight about what happened. The girl is still with him, and even had another child. Most people from that period of my life still think of me as the crazy ex. I can provide proof to a moderator if necessary. Story 35. I dumped a girl I was with because she started controlling every aspect of my life. I figured that if I lied about what happened to my newly dumped ex, we could be friends. It snowballed into a nightmare, and I had to do everything I could to avoid her wrath. This meant going out of my way to be crazier than her. She went ahead and slept with one of my friends to piss me off. In response, I sent her a picture of me with her cousin. She spilled my secrets and my life story to everyone we knew. I accidentally left her SD card in one of the school's computers. She befriended a couple of my close female friends to gather information on me, and I ended up sleeping with them too. Eventually, she broke down and deleted me from every social media platform we shared to get away from me. Later, I was hired as a manager at a job she was desperately trying to get as an entry-level position. I will be interviewing her for the position. She just doesn't know it's me yet. Story 36. A young man who is only loved once isn't really equipped to cope with losing the one person he's ever felt strongly for. As a child, you try to bargain your way into everything, striking deals with parents or teachers. And when you don't get what you want, there are usually compromises on the horizon. As an adult, people can leave in the blink of an eye or change overnight. There's no way to compromise or make a deal with someone who no longer wants to love you. When that happens, you're left throwing every emotion you have at a person. I'm fairly certain I seemed crazy, but trying absolutely everything and failing over and over again felt like the only option. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.